Welcome back to another episode of Got It, the filmmaking podcast that's got your back. If you missed it, in episode 2, we talked a little bit about film school, and episode 1, me and Emilio introduced ourselves along with Maggie. Maggie will unfortunately not be joining us for this episode, but she will be back very soon. Maggie, we miss you. All right. Emilio, let's get right into it. This episode, we're going to be covering crewing and crew positions. So, Emilio, what is crewing?
It's when you're like in a boat and
Not not what I was not the answer I was looking for.
so crewing basically means when it's a term that we use in the filmmaking world that basically means like you're working on a project, but you're not necessarily the director or the writer or whatever. Like if I say to Toby like, oh, I'm crewing on a set next week, that probably means that I'm in a couple different positions that's below directing. And Toby and I thought it'd be fun to talk about because actually this past week I crewed on something. And Toby and I both I want to be a director. Toby wants to be a DP, but every now and then we'll crew as something other than those roles. So we thought it'd be good to talk about what the roles on set are and my experience. So I think maybe Toby, what would you say are like the key, even on like a small project, what are like the key roles on set?
So, obviously you have a director. Director's the one that's running the show, talking to the actors. The main role I think of a director is performance, right? Like the director kind of oversees everything and is kind of the go-to person for anything on set. However, if you're a good director, you're really only focusing on performances because that's your most important part of making the movie or telling the story. Other than the director, you have an assistant director normally. Sometimes the director will take on this role if it's a pretty small set, but an assistant director's main priority is safety. So the assistant director will keep the schedule rolling and make sure logistics are okay, but it's kind of top priority is it's like the safety manager on set, like making sure everyone's being safe, practicing good judgment, and doing that. So that
Just to put in, like I think another thing at AD, like you said, is they're in charge of safety, they're in charge of schedule, but also a good AD is someone who's good also at anticipating potential issues,
yeah,
whether if they're like, oh, like it's about to start raining and Toby has to run in the scene, like let's shoot this for before it starts raining so we don't accidentally have someone slip, so they're the people who kind of anticipate potential issues and keep
yeah.
everyone on track.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, no, totally. They will also sometimes direct extras on set. So when the director can't be directing all those people, then that will go to the AD. But besides that, we've obviously got the DP, the director of photography, or the cinematographer. They're kind of all interchangeable. That role is primarily designing the visual kind of aesthetic, working with the director to create that visual aesthetic, and painting with light is kind of the big thing. Is you're setting up shots and you're talking with the director on the framing and the type of look you want with the lenses and all that. But your main role is lighting and making sure that the lighting is complementing the story and providing some sort of value in that sense. Beyond that, yeah, go for it.
I think it's important you're highlighting kind of like the main role because I think something, and this is kind of what our podcast is about, is kind of this kind of transitionary period from being like film school students to trying to become professionals. Um, Often what happens when you're at a very either beginner level or film school level is that when you're doing a role, you have lots of more responsibilities than maybe you would on a super professional set. Like Toby said, a director at the highest level most of the time is just working with actors. A DP at the highest level is just looking at the frame and trying to direct the light. But obviously, the lower level you go down, sometimes the DP is also operating camera, has to think about lenses, has to sometimes set up lights if they don't have someone to set it up. So sometimes it's good to know, even if you're working on something really small scale, to know kind of what your aim is to be, because you can start to level toward that. Because like for me as a director, a lot of times I have to be a producer, an AD, all these other roles as long as being a director. And my goal is to get to the point where I'm just doing performances. But obviously, on a professional set, director of photography just does lighting and framing direction. So who helps the DP, Toby?
So sorry, can you lead me into that again?
It's all good. So like you said, obviously the DP is in charge of lighting and lens choices and kind of directs the framing and the aesthetics visually. But obviously they need a team to help with that. So what are the roles underneath the DP that helps them visually?
Yeah, for sure. So gaffer is the kind of biggest one. The gaffer will be the one collaborating with the DP in terms of the logistics of the lighting. Some gaffers are creative and will give some creative input for the look and the aesthetic. Some gaffers are purely just technical and know what equipment to use for what the DP wants. It just depends. All these roles are pretty fluid and they shift because we're in a collaborative medium. So it really just depends on the person you're working with. Beyond the gaffer, there's usually a key grip. Key grip will be the one that's like the go-to for the gaffer. So the gaffer is kind of the head of the department for lighting. The DP is like the head of the department for camera. The director is like the head of the entire set, but obviously talent is number one. And so like there's kind of like all these different department heads, and in a smaller scale set, you normally will have just those department heads, and some of those department heads will actually be two roles. So like sometimes if you're on a really small scale set, the DP will operate camera, so there'll be a camera operator, there'll be the DP, they'll also be lighting everything all by themselves, which will make them like also the gaffer, and yes, then they're the first AC, first assistant camera. First assistant camera is the one pulling focus, but also is like the right hand person for all things camera and lenses. So when you do lens swaps and stuff, the first AC will work with the second AC, and the second AC, the second assistant camera, will usually be the one slating. That's like the slate slash clapper. Which is when you see behind the scenes or look at dailies, which dailies are just raw footage of the day that you shot. You'll see those slates, which are like those colorful kind of blank canvas things that'll say like title, and title the film, the director, the cinematographer, and like what shot they're shooting, and what scene, which is super helpful for the editor, because the editor will go in and they'll just look at the first frame of every single daily, and they'll be like, okay, this is this shot, this is this scene, I know exactly where I'm putting this in the timeline, and that just helps speed up production, and it's really helpful. Also, it's not so important to like clap, because clapping before used to help sync camera and audio together, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. Just because we have gotten so advanced, some cameras shoot audio already, and most editing software, if you have that in-camera audio, you can link it up with your external audio, which is great. So that already happens. I think that's a good way to segue into the sound department. In the sound department, we have a sound mixer who will be the one adjusting the levels and mixing the sound live on set, and then that sometimes is paired together with the boom operator or field recordist, which will be the one actually holding the boom mic and adjusting the lavaliers on the actors and actresses. So those are definitely sometimes tackled as one person on smaller sets, but sometimes they could also be like six people. Like when I was PAing for Fuller House, the sound department was like 40 people. Like there were like six different boom operators, and they were all sitting on different sides. They actually stood on top of the stage. There was a second story, and they hung out those huge poles, and they were actually suspended by elastic, so they didn't have to hold them up for so long, because boom operators need to be pretty strong with their shoulders and their arms, because sometimes you're doing a take for 20 minutes, and you got to keep the boom out of the shot and just hold it there, and it's a lot of hard labor, but it's also it's a great time, and it's fun. What did I miss, Emilio?
No, well, I mean, okay, so first of all, thank you, Toby. That was just like that was like the master class. Here's crew rules on set. I think
Yeah.
if for those who are listening, if you don't, we just if you don't know much about crew rules, we just spit it out a bunch of info to you. But we want to talk about crewing and why someone would crew and how someone would crew, but we just wanted to give a spiel about all the different positions, so we were at least starting from a common place for
Yeah.
people who don't know so much. But if you have any questions about any of those positions, feel free to reach out, because I know we just kind of went through them quickly. But no, I think, Toby, you got all the positions right, especially there's even more positions the bigger and bigger you get. I mean, if you ever watch a professional feature film, you stay for those credits. It's a lot of credits. So there's obviously a lot of
Yeah.
more roles, but those roles that Toby pointed out are pretty much the most necessary and most common roles you'll find, especially on smaller scale projects. And then the only other role I would say that sometimes is relevant, especially if you're doing like commercial work or professional work, is a lot of times you'll have a producer who is also dealing with either the logistics or the client or whatever. So yeah, so we all these different crew positions. And why did we bring this up? So um, uh, this past week I had an experience crewing, and I was telling Toby how I thought it'd be good to have a podcast episode talking about this, and how I'm a director, but why I may want to crew in other positions and what we can learn from that. So, um, when I this past week I was hired to gaff a commercial shoot in Seattle, which was for this grocery delivery service app, and so I saw this job posting and I reached out to apply for the job. And I don't normally gaff. I have no aspirations to be a gaffer. However, I do want to direct and I do want to shoot. And they mentioned in the job posting how this is a new company and how they're going to be making a lot of content. And so I thought to myself, okay, maybe I can crew on this position, make some connections, and then maybe it can lead to other opportunities down the line. So I reached out to them, and I know enough about lighting because of my time at NYU and the short films I made. So I got on the set, and it was a pretty easy shoot. It was a 2-day shoot. The actual first day, they asked me to find a grip. So I reached out to my friend Blake, who's also not a grip. He normally does VFX work, but he knows how to grip. So he and I got to get paid, go on set, light this kind of lifestyle shoot that was really fun. And during the entire time, I was making connections with the producers, with the client, with the talent. And then I was also getting better at directing in a way because I was lighting these scenes and I was like, oh yeah, this was just practice and me teaching myself some lighting stuff that I can then think about in my own projects. So the whole thing was really great. And what ended up happening at the end of the shoot is I was talking to um, the director and the producer, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll definitely want to hire you in the future." And I own a cinema camera, and sometimes, even though I don't want to be a DP, I do shoot stuff a lot. And they even told me that they'd maybe hire me to DP a commercial shoot or something in the future. So it was a good use of my time, and I just thought I could talk about that. So I don't know, Toby, if you had any questions that I could elaborate on in terms
Yeah,
of.
well, I think highlighting one big thing here is that when you're kind of starting out as a working professional, one of the best ways to get paid and learn is commercial shoots because there's so many of them. So, ultimately, yeah, exactly. So it's a flexible schedule and that, and ultimately, we want to be making feature films, but you can't just get out of the gates and just make your first feature. Like that's is almost impossible unless you have a crap ton of money and handed a script or something. That usually doesn't happen. So you definitely need to work your way up and value working your way up in that sense. So starting on smaller commercial shoots, making some money, obviously living off that money that you're making, but maybe setting a little bit of that money also aside for your own personal projects that you want to create and you want to produce yourself. And then having that kind of budget set aside, and once you get enough money for that, maybe you make a short film that is smaller budget but gives you a proof of concept for maybe a feature film, and then that feature film then gets some traction, gets you some exposure at some festivals, and then you use that kind of exposure to attract other executives and producers and studios to be like, hey, I showed you what I could do. I want to do it all over again on a different story. Come help me, pay me a little bit of money, give me a bigger budget than I'm used to, and let's go and try and make this movie. And that's kind of a little bit of in a nutshell, the kind of pipeline usually that you start. And commercials are very easy to get in entry level and learn a lot and also get paid for your work because there is a lot of unpaid student gigs, especially in our kind of age in our group. Which everyone still does because they just want to learn. Like the experience you get on set is the best. You can't be taught that in a classroom or on YouTube. So the best way to do that is just get out there and make yourself a little bit vulnerable. It sometimes can be a little nerve wracking to get on a set and not really know anyone or know what you're doing, but everyone in the industry I'd like to kind of vouch for and say everyone's you'll find your people, and there's good people out there, and just setting your guard down a little bit and being vulnerable and just asking questions, and there's always someone on set that is overqualified and always someone that's underqualified. I've always noticed that. There's a lot of people in the middle, but there's always someone that is like way overqualified. That's maybe like doing this just because it was convenient. They want a little extra bread or something, and then there's someone that's like going into this like, wow, I totally went way over what I thought I could do here.
That's actually okay. So I think there's a lot what you said that I think is really valuable. But one of the things you said that I liked is the idea of the pipeline, because I think ultimately a lot of people ask me either I have family and friends who are like, okay, so like I know you make videos, but like what like what's in the future? Like what are your plans? And then also I have people
Mm-hmm.
who ask me like, I'm just starting out, like how do I do it? And so I think what you said is there's a very obvious pipeline to success, and then you can just look that many people do this and people do it at different paces. So don't get me wrong, it's not easy. But basically, the pipeline is, I think, for most people, you get interested in video, you get interested in filmmaking. Maybe you buy a camera, you watch YouTube tutorials, and you teach yourself how to do stuff. And then the next pipeline would be either going to film school or taking some sort of film course. Or if you don't go to film school, maybe just PAing or being like a grip on set, or second AC on set, like some unpaid stuff. So whether you're in film school or not, you're probably doing unpaid work to start. So you get interested, you crew unpaid level, and then while you're on set, you learn how to make a movie. Maybe you make some of your own projects, and like Toby said, you level up. And so I think, kind of winding back the clock a little bit, I think we can both talk about crewing at NYU and our experience with
Mm-hmm.
that. Because for me, I mentioned this in the past episode, I went to NYU, I did not know how a crew worked at all these crew positions that Toby said at the beginning, I had no idea what those were. When I saw director of photography in the credits, I thought that was the person who did behind the scenes photography. Like I, I didn't know anything. But when I got to NYU, within the first few weeks, I had the opportunity to second AC on a thesis shoot, and I did not know anything. Like I was at film school for like a few weeks. I watched like some YouTube tutorials on like what it is to second AC and all these things. But on that set, I ended up meeting people and learning so much. And then like doing that enough times freshman year, doing these unpaid crew things. I learned a lot about directing, and then I felt prepared when I shot my first real short film the summer after freshman year, because I had basically shadowed all these senior NYU directors who already went through 4 years of learning, and I just watched them. And I think that's the biggest value of doing unpaid crew work when you're starting out, is that whether you're second ACing or gripping or a PA, and that's basically a production assistant, um, just watching the process, you can learn so much, because it is kind of like a weird sport, the crew
Mm-hmm.
filmmaking, but what was
Yeah.
your, because you had done a bit of crewing. Maybe we want to talk about your experience crewing with Ghetto Film School before going to NYU, what that was like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for Ghetto Film School, that's like the program I did in high school, which was a 30-month intensive production course. Which is in that time I made about like 7 short films, 2 higher budgets, like around like 3-4 thousand, and 5 for like dirt cheap, like maybe $60 or something, which is just paying people. I mean, not paying people, paying for food. For people to eat when they were there, yeah, Viaga pizza or two. So during that time, it starts out very very skeleton crew. When you start, it's literally just like you're the director, and then you have someone operating the camera, and then maybe one other person that's acting as like a producer, or like PA kind of thing. Then after that, it kind of got a little bit bigger with like 10 or 15 people on set. So then everyone kind of had their own departments, which worked out really well, and that kind of was that's where I excel, is that size crew. I think just because then you're intimate and have a good name basis with everyone, but you're also still efficient because you can delegate and have people do different things, which is great. So at NYU, a lot of that is similar. It's like it's kind of that, for the shorter stuff, and not the senior stuff, the kind of lower junior and sophomore, it's usually anywhere between like 8 to 16 people on set probably. And then when you get to the senior stuff, it can get a little bit bigger, especially if they have a little bit more of a budget. Like thesis films can get. How many people were on your set, Amelia? It's like closer to like 100, right, or maybe like 60.
For the latter
No, 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 no. For the one that you second AC'd, that
one, yeah, I mean, it was probably 20 people.
Right.
Like, well, the thing was is that the cast was pretty small, so that made it big. But I've been on sets with pretty big ensemble like casts, and yeah, like you said, it can get up to 60 people
Yeah,
depending
like
on
you
how
were
much.
you were crewing up, I think in Connecticut, right? Like
Oh
there was
yeah,
one production that you did that was pretty big. It was like a troll movie, which looked really cool.
yeah,
And that was like closer to like 60, 70 people, I think, right?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so
So.
that's one thing is in film school that's very fun is that, you know, depending a lot of times, especially NYU, people will do like out of state projects where like they'll go to Connecticut, they'll go to Jersey, they'll go wherever, shoot a project, and sometimes they bring crew with you. You'll like take an Amtrak or something and then like go make a movie. But yeah, I mean, so I think this would be a good transition because obviously I'm a director, you're DP, like that's where we want to be, but we've both done a lot of different roles. So I
Mhm.
thought maybe both of us could talk about like why we think it's good, because I think both you and I agree that it's a very good thing to do, especially early on in our careers, to do other roles. And so maybe
Yeah.
why that's a good thing, because I know for you,
Yeah.
you've done, obviously it makes sense for DP to be a gaffer because like lighting is with DP work, but I also know like
Yep.
didn't you do sound for a short
Mhm.
in like a different country? Like talk about how that made you a better DP. Like how does PA, because
Yeah.
you also, for people who don't know, Toby works for Warner Brothers and he's done like PA for Fuller House and did like editing for like other stuff. So like how do all these different roles help you be a DP, do you think?
So the sound was early. That was like that was at the end of Ghetto Film School. That was like the thesis film for Ghetto Film School. So we actually traveled to Israel and shot in Israel, which was super crazy and awesome. And for that, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do on set. And at that point in time, I was, I had the mentality of like I just want to try everything. And the position for sound mixer was open. A lot of people don't like to be like boom operator, sound mixer, so it's usually open. And if you're just trying to make some money and be on set, like sometimes people pay pretty hefty for that role, just because it's, it's literally the sound of the movie. Like, you need to that's important.
Sorry, before, just to butt in. So I'd say, I just want to say a couple of things. One thing, yeah, what you just said, the sound of a movie is really important. I think a misconception for sometimes either casual film watchers or even just people who's getting started in film is that they'll spend all their money on lighting and camera and production design, and then they're like, oh yeah, and then like we'll just have a road mic for like, like I see people on YouTube are like, oh yeah, just get this like $100 mic and just put on your camera. It's like, no, like I would rather watch a movie that looks terrible but sounds great than like a movie that looks great and sounds terrible.
Bad sound is distracting. Good sound, you will never know what happened.
It's the kind
It's
of the
so important. Like it, like I feel like of all my sets, I would gladly let someone like, gaff or AC if it's their first time doing it. Well, maybe not AC, but but like there's some
like
rules of like,
gripping or gaffing or
yeah,
PAing or
but like
great
I
entry
will,
level
like I need
roles.
to know that you are a sound person. I mean, but that's a good thing. The thing that I was just gonna say is it's pretty funny because Toby and I, we have a lot of friends who are either in film school or recently graduated from film school, and I'm recently graduated from film school, and so a lot of us are like freelancing and doing basically contracted crew work. We'll go in a commercial shoot, or we'll go on like a indie shoot and be a sound person or be a gaffer or grip or whatever, and make $200 day rates or whatever. But I have like I have two, I'm not gonna say them by name, but I have like two friends in mind who have had to post on their story like, do not do not ask me to do sound on your film, because it's like it's one of those positions that like it's kind of sucky to do, because if you're boom operating, your arms are gonna be tired, your job is so stressful and important, and it's just really tedious and not very fun. And I mean, at least for me, some people love sound, but because of that, it's also like this weird position where some producers and directors kind of like think of it as an afterthought. And so I just feel like for people who like do sound, it's like a very sticky situation. Like I have two friends of mine that I know have had to like announce on their Instagram story that they don't want to
Yeah.
do sound anymore because
No,
everyone
I
asks them
think
to
I
do
think
sound.
That's also a thing with any role, though. It's like it's very easy to get stuck in a role, because after you like, so like for me, that's first and second ACing. That was big when I was at NYU, is because I was trying to be a DP and be like shoot as much as possible. But I would be like, oh, I'll first AC for this project because like one of my friends needs help, and then it's like, oh, like he or she or they know how to do that role, they're competent at it, I'm going to continue to recommend them for that role. And it's very easy to get stuck into that role. And as a DP and as an aspiring like feature film cinematographer, I am very concerned that there's a lot of people that I've talked to that are now professional working first and second ACs that have had the same aspirations of me as like I want to be a feature film cinematographer, but then they start first ACing and they get a little more opportunities first ACing, the money is consistent, and they're like, you know what, I'm totally fine just staying at a first AC and giving up that dream of being the DP. And that happens in any department, not just camera, like any kind of world where you have to work your way up. It's very easy to get stuck at those middle jobs, because usually they're more there's a lot more of them, which means that you're working more, you're making more money, and for some people that's very satisfying, and very like feeling safe and having that stability is preferred over than chasing a goal or a dream or an ambition. And it's not like you're stuck forever, right? You sometimes are, stuck at that role for 10, 15 years, or I mean maybe like 3, 4 years, and then you're like, you know what, I'm gonna start declining all first AC work. And I think something that I do now is, when someone like I just interviewed for an NYU thesis film, or they had graduated, so they just finished, so they're now like doing their first film out of school. And I interviewed for the DP role. I didn't get it, and then they responded, was like, but do you want a first AC? And it's like, how do I work that, saying I'm not a first AC, I'm a DP, and I'm marketing myself as a DP? So usually the biggest thing that I do, which I don't know, is kind of like a white lie, is I'll say, hey, I actually am DPing another film that weekend now. And what I do is I actually tell them, like, even if I'm not actually DPing or working that weekend, I'll say that I am a DP. Yeah, I want it. I'm trying to, because I've just said no before and said like, oh, I can't do it, or no, I don't want to do it. And that doesn't get in people's head as much as saying like, hey, I'm actually a working DP, and I'm working as a DP on this date at another shoot. So it gets it into their head that they realize like, oh, this guy or this girl or this person is just this role, and that's what they want to do. And I think that's kind of some psychology subconscious thing, but it's worked for me. I mean, there's been points where I've met people and crewed for them as a first AC, and then they hit me up to first AC, and again, actually I tell them, actually I'm DPing something. 2 weeks later, hey, do you want to DP this project? And it's worked. I don't know necessarily if it's the nicest thing or smartest thing to do, but it's just, you got to think about it in terms of marketing and presenting yourself and showcasing yourself. Hopefully I don't get exposed from this, and now people are going to be like, are you actually DPing something this week?
Yeah, that's so funny. I didn't know that you did that, but it makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like, I have to say, like, for people listening, like, it's not really shady, because it's not like you're not lying to people. Like, it'd be kind of lame if you were caught in that lie, but like, it's not like you're grabbing someone's like video and be like, I shot this. It's like you're telling people, oh, I'm a DP, and it's like, you just got to tell people that you want to work as DP and things like that. And I think what you're bringing up, which I think is relevant to this conversation about crewing, is I think it's a really great thing for people to crew in different roles, and I think you can become a better filmmaker in whatever you want to do by doing other things within the world of filmmaking. But I also agree too, a big concern is like being cornered into just doing one thing forever, and then losing sight of what you mainly want to do. And so I think that's a big balance, is that like, okay, how do I stay working while also doing what I want to do? And I even feel that as a director, like right now I own a video production business, and what I want to do is freelance direct commercials, narrative work, things like that. But I'm also like doing like these random client projects that aren't always aligning with my end goal. But my mindset is I want to find what I can learn from these unrelated projects and then apply it to my narrative directing that's going to make me a director. And I think one thing you're talking about, which is also very relevant, is that I think something that's important for the film industry as a whole is that a lot of times people don't understand and don't put value towards crew positions, what they are and why they're important. Like, I always hate when I hear people like, oh, you can't DP this, but you have to AC it, because that's kind of like disrespectful to the craft of AC. Like, not every
Yeah,
DP is a good focus puller. I mean, there's
yeah,
people like, I know, like one of my really close friends who he shot my intermediate film. He's a working AC, and he's like so good at pulling like it's a craft for him, And so
yeah,
I just sometimes I find it funny when people are like, oh, you can't do this, but do you want to just do this thing? It's like, well, that thing is not necessarily the same craft as this other thing. But of course, I'm contradicting myself at the same time, because I'm saying it's important to learn many things. But I mean, for
yeah,
me, I'll say one thing in terms of the crew positions I think is relevant in this conversation, is that I want to be a director, but I also want to be on set and learn. Especially this past year, I just wanted to make as much stuff as possible, or be involved with as much stuff as possible, because I was in New York and I wasn't doing NYU in person. So last summer, I got hired to be the key grip on a feature film set. And in the theme of roles having important responsibilities, I will push back on something you said earlier, Toby, which is that it kind of, the hierarchy is DP gaffer, and grip. And while I agree that that is the hierarchy in most sets, I feel like that is not how it should. Like, I don't think that's what we should be aiming for in our industry, because for those who don't know, like the DP is the top hierarchy, that's for sure. But a lot of times people think that the gaffer like orders the grip around. Like the gaffer's like, oh, we're gonna put this uh this RE light here, so put a stand there, henchman.
Right.
But like, especially from a union perspective and also just like a craft perspective, like there's a craft in being a grip and being able to um rig things safely. Like that's their craft. And there's a craft for a gaffer to manage electricity and lighting safely. And so for me, I always see it as like the DP's at the top, and then the DP branches out into the gaff and grip, and then the gaff and grip are on the same level, but they just collaborate. But I think what you're saying is relevant too, because there's also a practical sense that a lot of times grips are just assistants, or they don't know as much as the gaffer, so it can feel like a below position. But I'm bringing
And then there's also positions below the grip, like, and then also there's the electrical department too. Like Best Boy Electric is the one that is managing the circuits and managing the voltage as well. So I mean, it's there's so much to get into, all that small nitty gritty, because there's just so many different roles and so many different kind of tiers that you can climb. And it all just depends on where you are geographically. Like I think the Los Angeles film industry and the New York film industry are very different. They use a lot of different vocabulary, and the way that they operate are very different. And I think that kind of is everywhere. Wherever you are shooting, there's going to be different local understandings of things. And a lot of time it's funny, because when you're on set and stuff and you like call out a name for something, it's like, what? Like someone looks at you as like, wait, we don't use that as this name, like that's what this is called. And it's like, okay, like there's no official rule book of like you call a C47 a clothespin, like yeah, there's just so many different names and so many different slang terms for things that it's really easy to get caught up on all that stuff, whereas sometimes it's better to just come to a understanding with you and your crew. And I think I really appreciate, I think one time on set that I learned, I was first day seeing a set, and what this guy named Samuel, he goes to NYU. It was an NYU thesis or intermediate, so it was like 15 people on set, and this was his junior level project. And he comes in and says, okay, before everyone starts working, I just want to sit in a circle or stand in a circle, introduce ourselves, what we're doing on set, and like one or two things about each other. And like having that kind of like a meeting before anyone gets working on anything is so important, because then it's like it's kind of put down that barrier of like, oh, I don't want to go up to this person and ask a question because I don't know who they are or what they're doing or any of that. So it's like having that kind of communal understanding welcomes a lot more collaboration and questions, and like being like, okay, I called a C47 a clothespin or a bullet, like like that's okay, like it doesn't, it's just there's a lot of that.
No, I mean, I think that's what. So, like I was saying, I got to be a key grip on this feature film set last summer in Seattle, and Seattle has a not nearly as thriving as New York or LA, but it does have a kind of fun indie film community. But I got hired to key grip this thing, and at that point, I had like gripped and crewed on like NYU sets, but I'd never done anything professionally. But they had another key grip, and I guess he like dropped out last minute, and it was a 2-week shoot, and they were starting like the next day. And they're like, okay, we need someone who's available for 2 weeks straight to key grip this. And I reached out to them. I was like, hey, I'm available. And I'm sure they probably would have wanted to go with someone a little more experienced, but like no one else was available for 2 weeks. I got to go on set. And so on that set, we had a DP. It was very limited. It was a very small crew. So I didn't have like a grip beneath me. It was just me, the gaffer, and the DP. And then we had like a lot of equipment to play with. So we had a bunch of different stands and things to play with and things like that. And I like that set because that set experience very much for me was one of the first times where I was like, oh yeah, I'm like a key grip. I'm in charge of rigging things safely, setting up stands and doing all these things. And I'm not like just being ordered around by the gaffer. Like me and the gaffer are going to the DP, figuring out his vision, and then we're together trying to figure out the safest way and most efficient way to like rig all the lighting and stuff like that. But I think to your point, one thing about that set that was tough is I didn't know anybody on this set. And because it was kind of more professional in terms of like, oh, let's just get to work and do it. Like it took me a while to like be friendly with people. But when you're working 12-hour days with a crew for 2 weeks straight, you like get to know people. But the reason why that set's relevant is that on that set, the first day C was this guy named Troy, and he's like a working first AC. He's repped by like the assistant camera union. um, and he and I became friends, and now he's still ACing and stuff. Like I think he's ACing on an Adam Sandler movie right now. So he's like working all the time. But we made a good connection. And just like what Toby said earlier, he wants to be a DP ultimately. But obviously he's gotten so focused on ACing, he doesn't really get that many opportunities. And when people think of him in the industry, they think of him as an AC. So he's been in the background trying to, add products to his portfolio where he can market himself more as a DP. And so when I reached out to him about my intermediate, he was so down to shoot it. And it was a good opportunity for me because I knew that he was an AC that wanted to be a DP. So I was able to reach out to him, even though, he was very skillful and probably overqualified for the level of shoot we were doing. But that was just a good example of like the value of crewing is like you can meet people that leads to other projects, your own personal projects. It can also, even though you're an AC, for Troy, he was able to then tell me he wants to be a DP, and then that led to an opportunity for him. So it's all a balancing act that we all do of like, when do I take this role or do this job on set, even though it's not what I want to do, because it may lead to opportunities in the future. So now that we've talked about crewing and all the different complexities of it, Toby, if I'm just like, if I'm a film student or if I'm not a film student, if I just want to get on set, if I want to land a crew position, how do I do that?
The hardest one is getting your first opportunity, because once you get your first one and you do a good job, you keep getting invited back and you're just in that circle. But in order to find that first one, it did take a little bit of finessing for me. Like I think at NYU I joined a few Facebook groups are huge. Like if you go to NYU and you want to get involved on set, there's this Facebook group called Tisch Crew Calls, which is great. And there's a lot of like geographical based Facebook groups. Like there's NYC Crew Calls, which is great.
and
In
all that.
Seattle, we have Seattle Filmmaker Collective. We have Pacific Northwest Filmmakers. Like we have a ton of groups,
Yeah.
and I think pretty much
And
every region in the U.S. has some sort of Facebook group.
And I don't use Facebook at all ever, but the Facebook groups are definitely a centralized place to kind of just connect with people and find jobs and opportunities to crew on set. And another thing is knowing people that are already in the industry helps. Knowing people that are at your level of understanding the industry is very important, because I may know 4 or 5 like working professional DPs or ACs, but they are in the union and 10, 15 years older than me, so at a different like level in their career, which means that I would probably be underqualified going into any of those roles. So it is important to find people that are kind of at your level or maybe a little bit slightly above or below, so then you can kind of stay within your means and value. And not necessarily be thrown into something that you have no idea what to do. That's not saying that you shouldn't try and exercise that muscle and try and like break into things that you don't have much experience in, but it's important to let the people know that, so then they don't come in with an expectation thinking like, oh, this person is gonna be able to rig this entire lighting setup for me perfectly, and then they come in and they're like, oh, I don't even know how to tie a trucker's hitch, or this knot. That's important. So
I think there's 3 things in that's very important to point out. Number one, totally, like at the end of the day, safety is the most important thing on a film set, especially if you're like think of doing grip work or electrical work or whatever, stuff like that, where you want to be very communicative about what you don't know. And in general, in film sets, sometimes, like even on professional film sets, like people always say, like if you don't know how to do something, like make sure, like ask me, like ask the DP, ask the AD to make sure you're doing it safely. And yeah, but then that comes also with finding the right level to apply to for a job, like you said, because on one hand, you're not going to be an AC until you AC something. You're not going to be a gaffer until you gaff something. But on the other hand, you don't want to you have your first AC job on a feature where everything's being shot at 1.3 T-stop and like trying to make sure the whole movie's in focus, And I think so I think it's a balancing act again, where it's totally okay for you for your first time doing something to be on a set, but to be responsible and to be honest, I think it's important to kind of like see like, okay, is this the type of level that I can handle? Like for example, if I had not gripped at NYU, if I had not taken production safety, if I had not worked at the production center, which is kind of like the production rental house for NYU, it would not have been good for me to do that key grip job, because we were rigging things above actors. We were working with really heavy lights. Like if I did not know what I was doing, I could have like seriously injured myself. Could have injured someone else. I could have broken equipment. So although that was my first time key gripping a professional shoot, I knew that I had in other ways the knowledge to at least handle it. And of course, there was some stuff on set that I was like, I do not know how to do that, or I don't know what that is, and I figured it out. But it was most of it, I knew how to do safely. But anyway, so continue. So okay, so I'm looking at Facebook groups, and then so if I see a job posting, like, what's the like? What kind of message should I be sending when I reach out to try to get the job?
So I try and keep it just short and simple because there's a lot of kind of like longer comments and stuff on there, and it's hard to kind of sort through that. So if there's an email that's listed in the an email or phone number that's listed in the ad, I will just post a comment, and a lot of other people in Tish Crew calls do the same thing, and just saying like messaged you or like sent like just commenting a confirmation that they've already reached out, which is it's helpful for two reasons. One, it shows other people that in the comments that you've already applied for it, and two, it tells the people that are looking for that role that, oh, okay, we're getting clients or getting possible people interested in this role. And another thing that I think is great, if you're in groups with other people that they can tag you in it and be like, hey, blah, like, hey, Emilio, this is a great opportunity for you or something, and then like other people will even comment on that thread saying like +1 friendliness or +1 communication or something, like saying like, oh, I also vouch for this person, because a lot of the film industry is that belt of trust. And that's also another reason why it's helpful to comment saying like just messaged. But yeah, I mean, I keep it short and sweet. I just go, hey, like, this is my name, this is a little bit about me, here's my resume, and here's my website. If you're interested in scheduling a meeting, please let me know. You can also reach me at and then I give them my phone number. So I keep it very, very short and sweet, and I just send them links to my work and what I've done. And on a micro level, if you're doing something that is like a PA gig or something, sometimes they don't even ask for work or anything. They're just like, if you're free and you have like you've crewed before, they're like, okay, you're on. But when you apply and you try and go for a little bit of those higher positions, you generally will have to go through an interview process. Sometimes you'll have to curate like a pitch deck or a mood board, or how you will kind of incorporate your value into the project, and meet with the director, meet maybe with some of the producers and other people that are already on the project. So it's almost like getting a job again. But those aren't necessarily for all the roles, like PAs, grips, and other kind of smaller roles and stuff. Equally as important, but generally a little bit less competitive and less rigorous in terms of an application process.
And I'd say I'd also add on what's interesting is that Toby and I went to I just had to stutter. Toby and I went to NYU, and the expectation at NYU is over your 4 years, you're gonna both make projects and like crew on a lot of projects, and everyone just knows that it's unpaid. Like there's never like a question of whether a student project is paid, because it's a student project. However, it's something that's relevant to know is, especially if you're doing the non-film school route, is you have to expect for at least a little while that if you're going to crew on set, that it's going to be unpaid. If you're PAing, if you're doing an indie short, it's going to be unpaid. And then as you get more skilled and you start making connections, then you can find avenues to those more paid jobs. So that's I think another thing that's relevant. And even like
another thing to really quickly add on top of that is like some people will be given a budget of a project, and they'll be like, hey, here's $500 to get equipment, and also pay yourself. And then those people will be like, actually, I don't even want to pay myself. I just want to put all the money into the equipment or into the resources to hire more people, because I'm investing in my career and my future. I don't necessarily need to collect $100 for this, as long as I can put this on my portfolio and distribute this and market myself as this working filmmaker.
Yeah, I think another avenue, sometimes obviously, like, and like I said, if let's say you're in Maryland, like I'm sure there's probably a Maryland Facebook group where people are posting commercial shoots, short film shoots, indie feature shoot. Like you can find a lot of different type of things. And honestly, like Toby and I are lucky because at NYU, there's kind of a common like quality level in terms of how crews are run and how sets are run. But I would say like because I've crewed on stuff that's like not at film school, sometimes you have to take a gamble, and like you show up and set, and sometimes people aren't as professional, or it's not as maybe the highest production quality, but you can always find a lesson from any level shoot you're in. I've done shoots where it's like, okay, this is like such a silly shoot, but then I still like learn stuff as a filmmaker that makes me better. And ultimately, that's why why I thought this would be a good episode, is just talking about like, yeah, like I've done sound, I've done lighting, I've done gripping, I've done PAing, I've done ACing, I've done producing, like I've done all these different roles. But every time I've done it, whether it's been on a huge project like an indie feature, or it's been on like a really small scale, like couple hour student shoot with like we have some like pizza, like it all made me a better director.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's say they get a crew position. Like, what are some principles that people should focus on
Like
when
the
they're on set,
rules of practice on set.
and then
Yeah. And like
how to get invited back?
getting,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So I think the most important is, if you don't know it, like something, you should ask. The worst thing you can do is take a gamble and risk like not knowing something and just like guessing, because that can cost someone money, it can cost someone time, and it can also cost like a safety issue. Like when you're talking about gripping and stuff, and if like you're not necessarily sure how to tie a certain knot or something, and you just like guess, and a light stand comes flying down in an actor's face, like that's not a good look for you. You're definitely not getting invited back for that. So that that's kind of my biggest pet peeve, is just ask questions if you don't know. The second big one that could arguably be the first is being on time, and being like on time is actually late. So the saying is, what's the saying? It's if you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. So you
If you're
Always want to
late,
be
don't bother
early.
showing up.
yeah, and if you're late, yeah, exactly. So always try and be at on a set 15 minutes before it starts, or 15 minutes before your call, if not more than that, because again, you're going usually to a new location you've never been to. Toronto, it's sometimes hard to find parking, sometimes hard to get into the building. There's all these kind of things that can happen. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, try and show up 15 minutes before, and then factor in an extra 30% or 40% of your commute into something going wrong. So if I have a call time in Brooklyn, say if I'm Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I have a call time in Brooklyn at 1 p.m., I'm going to probably think, okay, look, it takes me 35 minutes to get from on the train. Like, that's what Google Maps says. So I want to, I'll probably factor in an entire hour for that, because I want to be 15 minutes early, and then I also want to take another 15 minutes for stuff that might go wrong, like the train might get delayed, or, there might be some sort of factor. And that's the biggest, like, really, really important thing, is being on time and, being early and being present. I think the next kind of thing is also just, when you're on set, don't be on your phone. You want to be present, and you want to be there, and even if you're not necessarily involved in a certain part that's moving right now, or that's going, just standing there and trying to be ready to help, like maybe like seeing someone struggling carrying 2 apple boxes, it's like, hey, you want me to grab one of those, and always offering help, even if it's not your department. And I think that's also an opportunity of where you can learn. Sometimes maybe there's an AC like carrying three like different lens kits in their hand, and they're like, I need help. It's like, okay, here, let me help you. And then you go sit down with the AC, and then the AC is like, oh, do you want to, like, you ask like, what's in here? It's like, oh, these are some lenses. And then you learn a little bit about the lenses.
I think, okay, so I think two things you said that are very important is, one is this whole idea of being present. Like, one thing you have to learn when you're on set is to kind of get a vibe of set. Like, for example, Toby and I, we like to run sets that are pretty chill, and like we're cracking jokes and having a fun time during it. And that's just like, that's what helps me as a director, is to have like a low stakes environment. But there's some directors that want it to be focused, and so you kind of have to see how the crew works and then know how to act accordingly. The second thing is that most crew positions, especially if you're a PA, or especially if you're a grip, you're gonna go help set up, and then like 99% of the time you're just gonna be watching and waiting. And but the value of having a PA on set is that 1% of the time ends up being super critical. And so you just need someone there to help with that thing. So I'd say no matter what you're doing, even if your job is like as a PA or just extra help, always be present and be watching. And again, you're there to learn if you're just starting out. So if I was a PA, I'd want to be, you know, excuse me, watching at all times, trying to think. I mean, one thing I did that I'm a photographer as well. And so one thing I did at NYU is I was a behind the scenes photographer. And that was one of the best crew positions I got to go, because I got to basically be right next to the director, taking pictures of them working, literally watching them work, and just observing. So like that's something you can pursue. But yeah, I think being present is really important. Don't be on your phone, arrive early, just like you said. And then, yeah, I mean, most sets you'll get a sense of it, but I think a lot of sets people will be, especially if you're honest, are like, hey, I want to learn. There's so many times I've been on set where I've had a friend or I asked someone to come on and assist me. And then whenever we had downtime, I would just answer questions. Like for me, I had a music video shoot that I directed earlier this year, and someone that followed me on Twitter, she really wanted to get into filmmaking. So she reached out and she's like, hey, I just want to help on set. So I had her come on the music video set, and she was kind of helping as like a grip slash second AC, kind of all purpose help. And then whenever we had downtime, she was asking me questions and I was answering them. And I think that experience was good for her. So I know that's another thing you can pursue if maybe you're not finding film crew positions. See if there's some video production companies or freelance filmmakers in your area that they're like me and they may need help. But
Yeah.
yes, so I think that kind of wraps up the discussion in terms of crewing and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think quickly, like Amelia was saying, is that if you follow these kind of rules or these kind of like just standards of like standard business practices that you do on set, then 9 times out of 10 you will get invited back, and something that's helpful to kind of build your network is at the end of the last day of shooting. If you developed a good relationship with the people that you were working with and your collaborators, be like, yo, like you have an Instagram or like you have like something like that, just so you can get connected with them beyond just that weekend. And then there, when you have their Instagram, you can DM them, and be like, hey, do you have anything available for work? Or so a lot of people will post on their stories like in search of like 3PAs and that sort of thing. So it's really after you get your first gig and you follow the kind of practices, and you generally are doing well, and being a good help on set and actually providing some sort of value, then 9 times out of 10 you will get invited back. And kind of the best thing to do is to stay in contact with those people over social media, or over text message, or just so you kind of stay in the loop with them, and network. It really comes down to the idea of networking. And as long as you're doing a good job, then it's pretty standard and pretty easy to network, and keep a solid group of people in your kind of community to get jobs from.
Definitely. Okay, well, I think that wraps up. We talked about a lot in this episode. If anyone has follow-up questions, they can always reach out and we can address them in a future episode. But before we end this podcast episode of Got It, we of course want to talk about what we've been watching recently. So Toby, has there been film, TV, TikTok?
Yeah, no, I got two TV shows for you, boss. I watched The Mandalorian. I watched season 1 and 2. I like binged it in like 3 days. Yeah, I know I'm a little late to the show, but I did it because of the really interesting documentary that came out about the show and how they shot it using LED stage. And for me, I'm always trying to stay up to date on all the tech and everything, because I'm going into a technical side of filmmaking. So LED stages are becoming more popular. They're big studios like Warner Brothers just built one in Lisbon. So they're definitely becoming more used and universally accepted. And it's really interesting. If you don't know what that is, I definitely recommend checking out the documentary or just looking up like a YouTube video on what an LED stage is, because it's probably going to be the future, and it saves a lot of money, and it also makes lighting a lot easier because you're able to use the practical lighting off the LEDs, and you're basically projecting an image onto the LEDs, so the actors are able to work real time with the visual effects, instead of just being in green suits and seeing a solid green background, which is really helpful for performances. It saves money and saves time because you don't have to worry about it in post. And it's also really nice and convenient for the cinematographer, because they're kind of able to see the shot and frame everything up and light everything as it is, instead of waiting until post-production and trying to find and fidget and finesse with those mistakes, or maybe things that aren't necessarily the most appealing. So I really like watching that documentary, and I thought that the show is pretty good. I'm not a huge Star Wars freak, but I thought I got into it, and I thought it was well executed, and definitely I couldn't tell that it was shot in an LED stage. Like, I didn't know that, and I think that that's kind of the biggest thing, is that they got away with a lot there, and they were able to kind of finesse and do that. So that was great, and I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't. And then the other show I started watching was Succession. I watched the pilot. I literally have only watched the pilot, and like I'm in the middle of the second episode right now, so don't tell me what's going on. But I really liked the pilot. I thought the pilot did a lot, and it crammed a lot into an hour. Like there was like, I felt like I knew the entire family after the hour, and I think that's what shows that the pilot like really knew what it was doing. Like pilots are so important. Because it's like kind of reels you into the show and gets you liking the characters, and after you kind of like the characters, then you're pretty much in for the entire ride. Even if the plots are kind of dry, at least you're supporting the characters. And I think TV, talking to a lot of the development side of Warner Brothers and WBTV, is a lot of it is characters, and that they write for TV with characters in mind. They don't necessarily write with a plot or a story in mind, whereas like feature films and stuff, it's usually generally anchored on a story. Obviously that story has multi-dimensional characters, but in TV, I think the focus is a little bit more on the characters, building out their kind of personalities and their traits and their arcs, and going from there. So that was kind of my little TV versus movie rant, which I thought was pretty interesting. But Emilio, what did you see?
I'll say I love Succession. Also shot on film. Very interesting. Yeah, that I love that show so much. I'm so excited for season 2. But my recommendation is a lot shorter, but I finally got to see The Green Knight in theaters, which is a new A24 movie, starring Dev Patel. And I have to say, it's a very it's like a weird movie because it's all very like artsy and stuff like that, avant-garde or whatever. But it's not really avant-garde. No, but it was a beautifully shot movie. It was a very fun time, and it's one of those movies that it wasn't the most perfect movie to me, and I think it could have had a little stronger plot, but the look of the film was so like special and unique and well crafted, and the structure and the editing and the pace of the film is something that I haven't like seen in a movie before, like ever. So like just the kind of everything about it just felt very unique, and I've been thinking about it, and it's probably one of my favorite. It's definitely the best looking movie I've seen this year, and it's been like it was a very fun watch, and I suggest people check it out. It's in theaters right now. Yeah, it's a little weird, but it's very fun, and if you want a different take on fantasy, then you should check it out. But that's it for this week. Thank you all for listening.
My camera just stopped recording. I don't know about yours.
Yeah, I had to restart it while you were doing your TV.
Okay.
We'll do Tail Slate.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for watching. Well, thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it. This is the Got It podcast. I'm Emilio Miguel Torres. You can find me at Emilio Films on all social media platforms. What about you?
My name is Toby Romero. You can hit me up on Instagram at Toby Romero. That last O is a 0. Or on TikTok. I've got some fun tips and tricks on filmmaking, and that is at CineHacks. Cine, CINE, hacks is in computer hacking. But thank you guys so much. You can also email us at got.it.pod@gmail.com. And with any questions and stuff, you can also reach out to us on social media. We're happy to help answer any questions, or if you want to give any recommendations to material to cover on here, we would love to do that. And I think that brings us to a close.